who has the Alvin York style long guns, which the country people call hog rifles or hog guns, on the wall in his office at a trading business that makes small billboards and placards and metal plates with messages on them for sale around the world. And Second Amendment types, humorous types, and Fred Skiller does that in his business. He's a distributor and is a countryman, of course, and has had a great deal of personal power in Hamilton County over the years. I mention him only because we've been thinking about Alvin York, the Tennessee war hero, whose monument is by the War Memorial Building in Nashville, and who is who is a devout Christian. Of course, he's on the other side now, but he is a devout Christian. Just as all who have passed onto the other side, into the veil of darkness through death, atheists, of course, believe in God on the other side. Stephen Hawking among them, and those who believe in God on this side and who loved him and tried to obey him, they're Christians even now, Christians, ones of the Christ, even today. And so we speak of them in the past tense, only temporally, but in theological terms, they are there in heaven. This is David Tulis, and we're at 800-8949, 800-8949, brought to you by yournews.com, yournews.com, the website that I'm taking over here for the Chattanooga area. And if you want to find out what's really happening, the same material that's at Nooganomics.com, you will find there at the Chattanooga pages of yournews.com. Just choose Chattanooga as your location, and it should be that it automatically, if your URL is in the area, Chattanooga and eight surrounding counties, you will automatically get our website. You arrive first at the national and international pages. But if you go to the menu, just click on local, and there we are. And we have things to the man who matter, musings about for example, the matron of the Constitution who is wary of liberty lingo, and a story about June Griffin and my efforts to help June be safe in her travels on the public right of way. She travels of necessity, as many people do. Well, this is David Tulis, and if you have a problem you want me to think about, I'll be glad to hear you out. The number is 800-8949. I do work in solving problems. In fact, many stories that we've covered here at Nooga Radio are people with a problem, and they tell me about their problem, and in writing about it, I help them solve it. It's amazing what the press does. The press it's different from the media, but the press is about light. It's shedding light where there is none, and where people acting in obscurity and darkness run over and injure their lessers. And that's almost always what happens. The great ones of our day, those who aspire to be leaders and end up being leaders, as we say, trample on the poor, the homeless, the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. And God has particular care for those people. God is not, God. The idea of God's justice is not properly represented in the popular picture of Lady Justice, which is really Persephone, a Greek goddess. Anyway, the idea that she's blindfolded holding a scale, suggesting that justice is impersonal. Well, no, justice is not impersonal. It is highly personal, and the source of equity, the fountain from which equity flows, God himself, is highly particular about justice. Now, in one hand, all are equal before the law, and they should be, but God is concerned, knowing how the human heart wanders. He's concerned about how the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger end up being abused by the great ones, right? Those who have high office, those who are sheriffs, those who are mayors, those who are governors and lieutenant governors and attorneys general, people like that who have authority ostensibly for justice, right? Ostensibly to suppress wickedness and to encourage the good, pursuant to Romans 13. And yet they are negligent or outright, blatantly abusive. Now, one of my jobs as a member of the press is to solve problems. So if you have a problem you want to talk to me about, David Tulis, just call me. Okay, just call me. And if it's something that needs my detailed attention, we'll talk in person. Okay, you just come and see me here at my studio, and I'll give you a consult. Okay, I'll listen, hear you out, and maybe there's something I can do for you. Sometimes I hear about problems that are so great and so tangled with so many parts that there's simply nothing I can do. Inmates' wives have contacted me, and I've heard doleful stories of long trains of abuse against, say, a woman and her children, and her flight into another state, and such things as that. And all I can do is just try to pray for that person and digest the waywardness of the human heart, and the many evils built into the system, baked into structures that arise from statutes written by the General Assembly. So we have a desire to solve people's problems. So I'm thinking about the fluoride problem in North County. We covered that pretty extensively, and I'd like to think that we encouraged the board to vote for the right thing, which was to end fluoride. We've covered the fluoride crisis in Hickson, Tennessee, with the Hickson Utility District's staunch support of an industrial waste put into the water supply by policy not required by anyone. And so we are writing about that. And also the Gaddy case and numerous other cases that we've written about. And I like to think that we offer a kind of temperance, right? The temperance movement back in the 1910s was to have people abstain from the consumption of alcohol. It ended up in a disastrous constitutional amendment called the Prohibition that created the Cosa Nostra and large criminal operations that are still alive today, just taking different forms, feeding different vices. And whenever you have a prohibition, you create a criminal class. And we have the drug war, of course, which is a prohibition against narcotics, which has created a drug war against the people with a pretended goal of thwarting the consumption of narcotics. And so we are as members of the press shining light on these things. Now, one area that has not been given much attention, and I am at 800-8949, 800-8949 if you want to give me a call, is the prospect of Chattanooga becoming an independent city-state. Now, this is an idea that Mayor Burke himself believes is possible, and I'm sure part of his government in the executive branch of Tennessee is in that direction. He had just recently a conference one evening down in the Edney building with a couple hundred local notable entrepreneurs and thinkers and activists and do-gooders and important people, political figures were there, and candidates for office. Yusuf Hakim, for example, was there running for the state house, and many others. And the study was populism and the new localism. And Bruce Katz, the author, he's got some major faults in his book, which I hope to bring to the light at some point. But he had many good ideas about local economy and the free market. Local economy, which is what I cover here at Nooga Radio on the David Tulis Show. David Tulis, that's me, brought to you by yournews.com and also Nooganomics.com, 800-8949, 800-8949. Now, the question about the independent city-state is one that I take very seriously. It is part of the geopolitical future. We are in a mega trend of decentralization. Centralization has peaked, and the gigantic behemoth agencies of the federal power and even of the state power are in a long-term decline. They are losing their standing. There is rising resentment against them, and localism has for all of its philosophical faults, it has many advantages and many benefits. And so I'm borrowing from them and suggesting that we have a benefit here in Chattanooga if we think about them. Caller, you're live on the air. This is David Tulis. What's on your mind?
Morning, David. Did you say Andy Burke wants to make Chattanooga a sanctuary city?
Well, what do you know about this, Mike? What's the story?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. He's a liberal Democrat, and it would be blatantly unconstitutional in violation of the Supremacy Clause in federal law. And mayors that do that should be arrested, like in California. I mean, there's no legal authorization to do that. You can't say, well, we're going to decide that we're going to violate federal law and let criminals know when ICE is coming in to arrest you. Where are they authorized to do that? Well, I'm just curious.
Well, the answer is that there's probably not an explicit authority.
Do we know?
Well, it is perhaps can you hear me okay?
Yeah. I'm just wondering where would the city have authorization to do that? That'd be in violation of the Supremacy Clause.
And the Supremacy Clause says what, Mike?
It would be in violation of the Supremacy Clause if he made it a sanctuary city.
What does the Supremacy Clause say? What is that about?
Say that again?
What is the Supremacy Clause about?
Supremacy Clause is about the superiority of federal rule when the federal Constitution supersedes state rule, called the Supremacy Clause, where federal law supersedes state law other than Article 1, Section 10. Prime example,
well,
the state just can't go printing money, while neither can the federal government. The state cannot create alliances with other countries.
Well,
the state cannot determine commerce, interstate commerce.
No,
certain things, let's say treaty law, let's take immigration. That's all federal territory. And if the federal government passes a law regarding immigration, the state must follow that. If it doesn't follow that,
but Mike, you're what you're doing.
50 individual states passing 50 individual immigration laws.
Mike, what you're doing, Mike, listen for a second. What you're doing is proposing you're pretending somehow in these commentary that the federal government is obeying the Constitution exactly. But even on one of the points you mentioned, immigration, the federal power has no jurisdiction under the Constitution to regulate immigration. And here you are pretending that it is lawful, that it is constitutional. No, it has authority. No, it doesn't. It has authority to control naturalization and nothing else. And so why are you, Mike, proposing that the Constitution be applied strictly to cities when the federal government is the largest abuser of that document and that covenant? Why you're
because many wrongs don't make a right. Just because you're wrong in everything else you do, you could be right in one area. And in this area, the federal government is correct. Every country has a right to determine their boundaries. They have a right to set rules and regulations regarding people within their boundaries.
No, they don't. Even people.
That's why we came up with a constitution.
Yeah, but Mike, you're suggesting.
That's why we eliminated the Articles of Confederation.
Okay, hang on.
Breaking now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
A student pulled a gun out and shot two other students at a high school in South.
Okay, that's the news, and we are interrupting the news for the David Tulis program. And I do thank you for giving me just a minute of your time. We were having Mike, Confederate Mike, on the phone, and he's holding up strict obedience to the Constitution and saying, how can cities have any kind of policy for it? Well, in some we have, as we understand, cities already are involved in being sanctuary cities at many points because federal law is unenforced in majority. Most federal law on the books is not enforced. Cities that are given charge of enforcing it largely do not. So there are large areas where already there is a sanctuary city, depending on how the administration of that city corporation governs itself and what it's willing to let slide. And the feds can enforce their own rules and even their own regulations in most instances. So the Pareto's rule would say, the 80-20 rule would be that 80% of the effort goes to enforcing 20% of the rules, and there probably a smaller portion yet is of people or corporations or businesses or interests are the actual target of a rule. There's a lot of self-reporting, self-compliance, voluntary compliance, and so on to make the system work. It operates on fear and threat. And yet cities and counties and even states largely ignore the law. It's happening in many areas. So I would say that Tennessee, insofar as it rejects the Constitution, is already an independent operator in many areas. Think, for example, about the oath of office that Tennessee Highway Patrol troopers take. They don't take any oath to uphold the federal Constitution. I would say that's a grievous fault. But given that they haven't, they are free to ignore it. which they do, of course, they do ignore it. And so there already is, if you're concerned about states and states' rights and the limits of authority and the prospect of future growth of states, there already is an independence. Now, we're talking about the idea of a sanctuary city, and I have in mind, unless you want to talk about something else, at 800-8949, 800-8949, bringing up the idea of the haven that Chattanooga could be if it strictly obeys Tennessee law. So right now, Chattanooga and Hamilton County are in regular violation of state law. And they're in violation of state law because they enforce the transportation code, which is Title 55, as if it applied to everybody, as if everybody was involved in transportation. And you're saying, David, you've lost me. You've lost me. Well, I know I have, and that's why I have to do quite a bit of writing about this and occasionally discuss it with you, because we have the groups that God cares about the most, mostly vulnerable to enforcement, and that would be the poor, the minority, the immigrant, the orphan, and the widow. Again, orphan and widows are assumed to be poor. They are assumed to be the most vulnerable in society, not having a head of household, or not having a father, or even in some cases a mother, and being given charge to the state or to some private charity, such as the Baptist Home here in Chattanooga. So they don't have parents, or a woman who doesn't have a husband. She is very vulnerable. It doesn't say widowers, but widows, right? Not widowers are vulnerable, but widows. And that's because women are vulnerable. They often have children. They have obligations attending to the home and children. And so they're not able to earn, have cash flow from jobs and industry. Though, just point out that the Proverbs 31 woman in the book of Psalms, book of Proverbs is described largely in economic terms. She has described the virtuous woman largely in economic and capital creating productive terminology. So we have in Tennessee an abuse of the law. I agree with Mike. We need to have all parties obey the law, but the chief offender of the federal Constitution is the national government. It was written against them. It was written to restrain and constrain that entity, and it has long ago rejected these restraints. And so it is a lawless entity, but one facing bankruptcy in the very near future, with a $230 or $220 trillion burden, obligation, debt overhang, $21 trillion in actual treasury liabilities, loss of credit, and worldwide disesteem. Right, people fear the American government and disesteem it. It has military operations going on in more than 80 countries, according to a report last year, quoting, I think, Ron Paul, or maybe Rand Paul, in 80 countries. We are certainly an adventurous, imperial, intervening power, meddling in other people's elections, left and right, with no apologies. Right, we don't apologize for interfering in democratic processes in other countries. So we have a lawless government on the national side and on the state side as well. And mimicking its betters, we have the same abuses or similar abuses by the city corporation of Chattanooga and all the other ones in the area. And I would say all the ones across the state. And that would be upon the use of the car, the American machine, the machine of freedom, the machine of liberty, in which you can go to move yourself to a new location, right? You can go to another state. You can go to another city. You can transport people and goods for hire in that car. You can move yourself about privately in that car or truck. And the private movement is what is being abused by Chattanooga city government, the police department led by Chief David Roddy, in executive function. This is an executive function. Policing, sheriffing is an executive function of the county government. And on March the 1st, I gave Sheriff Hammond administrative notice, transportation administrative notice, which you can read online. It's 20 pages of legal analysis. It does not make any arguments at all. Okay, I make the arguments here. They're not made there. To simply a notice on what the statutes show and relevant court cases. And it is a document, as I tell Sheriff Hammond, that is disputed by the grandees of our state, by the potentates of our state. Governor Haslam, the High Court, and the General Assembly all pretend that something other than what the law shows is operative. And the operation is deleterious. It is damaging to the poor, the widow, the hungry, the orphan, the ignorant, and minorities in the county. And that would be traffic enforcement outside of lawful authority. Now, I've got more to say about this, and I hope you can hang on. I've got some important announcements, very important announcements just ahead for your edification. Brought to you by Signal Voice and Data. Near is better than far, small than big, and simple than complex. And down to the footnotes at 5-point type, Helvetica, sans serif type now, mind you, personal is better than corporate and physical than abstract. I've been reading a book on legal fictions at nighttime. Interesting.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, digital